I hope that you are well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 8 English lesson on commas. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts. Grade 8. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of commas. All right, so we're doing commas. So we said our chapter is commas. Our subject is English Language Arts. Grade 8. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on under the chapter of commas is commas with coordinate adjectives, and commas review. All right. So the lesson commas, right, is basically a continuation of our previous lesson where we also did commas. And in our previous lesson, we did commas with series, dates, and places, commas with compound and complex sentences, as well as commas with direct addresses, introductory words, interjections, and interrupters. And today we are going to do commas with coordinate adjectives as well as commas review, where we're just going to go over what commas are. All right, so we are doing commas with coordinate adjectives, and we said, but not we said, but yeah, commas with coordinate Adjectives, right, are adjectives that describe the same noun equally. Firstly, an adjective, it describes a noun or tells us about the noun. That is an adjective. It describes a noun or it even just tells us about the noun. That is an adjective, right? But in this case, which is a coordinate adjectives, right? Coordinate adjectives are adjectives that describes the same noun equally, right? And they should be separated with a comma. If we answer these two questions, right, to check for coordinate adjectives. So whenever we want to check coordinate adjectives, then we need to ask ourselves these questions. Do the text still sound okay when the adjective order is changed? And does the text still sound okay when and is inserted? So we need to ask ourselves that question during this lesson. Whenever we do the adjective, right? And we either replace the noun or we remove the noun, we add, or when we add and, then we need to see if. It's almost like it's like a way of testing it. And if the answer is yes to both of these questions, then the adjectives are coordinate and should be separated with commas. All right. So we said coordinate adjectives or adjectives that describe the same noun equally, and they should be separated with commas, right? And before it is separated from commas, we need to ask ourselves questions before we check for when we check for coordinate adjectives. The first question is, does the text still sound okay when the adjective order is changed? And does the text still sound okay when and is inserted? Right? So when you say yes to both of these questions, then the adjectives and coordinates, then the adjectives are coordinate and should be separated with the comma. All right. So we are now going to find out what coordinate adjectives are. Right? And if we look for adjectives that are next to each other, right? Then and then test whether they are coordinate adjectives, right? And remember we said we need to ask ourselves those two questions. And if both of those questions are yes, then by all means you have a coordinate adjective. So we are going to look at adjectives now that are next to each other and then test whether they are coordinate adjectives, right? For example, abrupt, we have the word abrupt and we have the word thunderous. Abrupt and thunderous, right? And they are coordinate adjectives. And when they are coordinate adjectives, right, then we say that they should be separated with a comma. And you can tell this because the text still sounds okay when the adjective order has changed. But now, if we look at the text, right, it says, upon hearing the abrupt thunderous crash. You see, there we have our two adjectives that is next to each other. So, upon hearing the abrupt thunderous crash, the farmer ran outside to discover that his dilapidated corn silo had completely collapsed. Right? And there we say that we had identified two. If we identify the two adjectives, then it is abrupt and thunderous that describes the crash, right? And we say that if we look at those two that is next to each other and test whether they are coordinate adjectives, which is abrupt and thunderous, then yes, we can say they are coordinate adjectives. And when they are coordinate adjectives, then we can agree that they should be separated with a comma. Remember, we said that only if we identify that an adjective is a coordinate adjective, then we can separate it with a comma. And you can tell because the text still sounds okay when the adjective order is changed, as well as when and is inserted. So, which means that if we, for example, say, if we were to say, thunderous abrupt crash. Like, for example, upon hearing the abrupt thunderous crash, the farmer ran outside to discover his dilapidated corn silo had completely collapsed. Or if we were to add a comma and say, upon hearing the abrupt and thunderous crash, right? Which means that even if we add our word and, or if we were just to add the comma to that word, right? And then it would basically still be the same. And then when we look at that word dilapidated and corn, right? Those are not words that are adjectives, right? So they should not be separated with a comma. And you can tell this because the text does not sound right at all when the adjective order is changed or when and is inserted. Meaning that if we were to, for example, say, the farmer ran outside to discover his dilapidated and corn silo had completely collapsed, it's not going to sound the same because now it seems like as if we are changing some of that sentence, like we kind of changing the sentence, right? Or the sentence just doesn't make sense. All right. So we're now going to look at another example, another sentence where we are going to say or identify, or we're going to see if the adjectives within that sentence is a coordinate adjective or not, right? Based on if we were to add a comma between that or if we were to add the word and, right? All right, let's go to the next one. It says, last weekend, the Josephs finally sold their rusty gas guzzling van and purchased a more fuel efficient hybrid vehicle. So we are going to look at two. So we can say, last weekend, the Josephs finally sold their rusty gas guzzling van and purchase a more fuel efficient hybrid vehicle. So there's two that we have identified, right? Remember, we said we need to see if it is a coordinate adjective if we either add the commas to it or if we add the word and between those two words to see if it is a coordinate adjective. And if we look at those two words next to each other, right, and test whether they're coordinate adjectives. For example, rusty and gas and guzzling. Rusty and guzzling, right? They are coordinate adjectives. And the reason why we say they are is because if we separate that with commas, right? For example, if we say last weekend the Joseph family sold their rusty, comma, gas guzzling van, or if we say last weekend the Josephs finally sold their rusty and gas guzzling van, right, and purchase a more fuel efficient hybrid vehicle, then yes, we would say that that is a coordinate adjective. And you can tell this because the text still sounds okay when the adjective order is changed, right? As well as when and is inserted. Remember, we said that when we need to try and either add a comma to it or add and to it to see or to basically test if the whole sentence changes or if it still says the same once it is added. And if the sentence still says the same once it is added. All right. So we said we made mention of the rusty gas guzzling and we made mention of hybrid fuel efficient vehicle, right? And if we look at the two words, which is hybrid fuel efficient or fuel efficient and hybrid, those are not coordinate adjectives, right? So they should not be separated with a comma, and you can tell that because the text does not sound right at all when the adjective order is changed or when it is inserted. All right, let's do one more and then we're doing our test. It says we when the warped unstable shelves in the pantry began to bow in the middle, Tyler bought some new plywood to rebuild them. So when the warped, unstable shelves, so when the warped, unstable shelves in the pantry began to bow in the middle, bend in the middle, Tyler bought some new Peloton to rebuild it, right? So we are now going to identify the two words within that sentence that we would say is the adjectives. Then we would say it is warped, unstable. Warped, unstable. All right, so that is the two adjectives that is next to each other. And remember these two adjectives that is next to each other, we now need to test to see if this is a coordinate adjective. And we will be able to check based on if we add a comma between those two, between warped and unstable, is it going to change? Is the sentence going to change? Or if we add and between those two words, will it change? And if it doesn't change, and then they are coordinate, then that's it. That two words are coordinate adjectives. Right? So coordinate adjectives is usually next to each other. All right. So we see that if we look at those two words, right? Then that two words, we need to see if it is a coordinate adjective, which is warped as well as unstable, right? All right, so we see that we found out these two words warped and unstable next to each other. So now we see that when it comes to warped and unstable, right, those are two words that tells us about the shells, right? So the shells are warped and the shells are unstable. That is basically how these shells are then being described. But now if we test to see if warped and unstable are coordinate adjectives. All right, so we see that when it comes to warped and unstable, all right, these two are coordinate adjectives. And the reason why they are is because if we were to put a comma there between warped and unstable, or just under, or just by unstable, or something, then it means that our sentence would have still been the same. And we look at the sentence where we say that warped and unstable, right? All right, now let's go to our test where we're quickly going to test to see if we will be able to identify a coordinate adjective on our own, right? So we, by looking at our sentence, right, we are going to have to identify first where the comma must go to separate the coordinate adjective. So, for their vacation, Jackson and Molly rented a small beach bungalow, but the unanticipated fast approaching hurricane forced them to vacate and end their vacation early. So we need to insert one comma to separate the coordinate adjectives, right? So if we look at the first one, it says for the vacation, comma, Jackson and Molly rented a small beach bungalow, but the unanticipated fast approaching hurricane, or do we say the unanticipated comma, forced them to vacate and end their vacation early. So we need to add a comma to separate the coordinate adjectives. All right, and if we were to insert or to choose a comma, then we would choose option one. And option one is correct because we added our comma in front of our coordinate our coordinate adjective. We need to insert two commas to separate the coordinate adjectives. It says thorough habitual hand washing is an ideal way to keep yourself healthy. Disinfecting contaminating surfaces is another simpler, effective method for preventing the spread of viruses. So now we are going to add two commas. It says the first one says thorough, comma, habitual hand washing is an ideal way to keep yourself healthy. Disinfecting contaminated surfaces is another simple, comma, effective method for preventing the spread of viruses. So there we have two, like in option one, I see we have two commas, right? So we will go with option one. It's like thorough, comma, as well as after simple, effective methods. And option one is correct. So the new recruits managed the easy 6 mile hike without too much trouble, but they were ready to collapse by the end of a long, arduous sprint that followed. So we need to add one comma to separate our coordinate adjective. Is it option one or option two? All right, then if we were to identify or select, we insert our comma to separate the coordinate junction. adjective, sorry, and then we choose option one. It says the new recruits managed the easy 6 mile hike without too much trouble, but they were ready to collapse by the end of the long, arduous sprint that followed. So option one is correct, right? Because even long orders, that is basically describing the sprinting. So we are inserting one comma to separate the coordinate adjectives. That is knowing that we'd be traveling on narrow, winding mountain roads. We put new snow tires on the car before setting out. So we need to insert one comma to separate the coordinate adjective. It says, knowing that we'll be traveling on narrow, winding mountain roads, we put new snow tires on the car before setting out. So we need to add one comma. It says either option one or option two. So knowing that we'd be traveling on the narrow, winding mountain roads, we put new snow tires on the car before setting out. All right, so we are going to insert a one comma to separate the coordinate adjectives. And knowing that we'll be traveling on narrow, winding, smart mountain roads, we put new tires on the cars. And if we were to add our comma, it says, knowing that we'd be traveling on narrow, winding mountain roads, we put new snow tires on the car before setting out. So if we were to add that one comma, then we would say it is option one. where we added our one comma to show that we are separating the coordinate adjective. So we are inserting one comma to separate the coordinate adjectives. It says being observant is an essential investigation skill for a police detective because sometimes it's the small subtle clues that help solve a crime. All right, and if we were to identify or choose our coordinate adjective, then we would say it is, we go with option one, and in front of subtle clues, that is where we're going to add our adjective. So well done. So we need to insert one comma to separate the coordinate adjective. It says the frustrated, overwhelmed writer sat at his antique mahogany desk for hours attempting to complete the final draft of the will. So we need to insert our one comma to separate the coordinate adjectives. And it says the frustrated, overwhelmed writer sat at his antique mahogany desk for 4 hours attempting to complete the final draft of this novel. And if we were to add our commas, The frustrated, overwhelmed writer sat at the antique mahogany desk for hours attempting to complete the final draft of this novel. So if we were to add a comma, we would put our comma after frustrated. All right. I will. I didn't use help. Sorry about that. So we added next to frustrated, we added a comma because we are saying the frustrated, overwhelmed writer. That is how we are describing the writer, right? We are describing the writer in two words, which is we describe this writer as frustrated and we describe the writer as overwhelmed. And remember, we said that if we can put a comma in between the two adjectives, right? Then we will be able to see if once we put the comma between those two between the two adjectives, right? If the sentence will change, if the sentence changes completely, and then it is not, we cannot say it's a coordinate adjective. But if the sentence says the same, then it is a coordinate adjective, right? Or we can attempt by putting and between those two. All right, so we then mentioned option one. All right, and that is where we added a comma in between our coordinate adjectives. All right, let us choose another one or insert one comma to separate the coordinate adjectives. Remember, coordinate adjectives, it is two adjectives that are next to each other that describes the noun. So it's two adjectives that are next to each other that describes the noun, right? In order for us to test to see if it is a coordinate adjective, if it is valid, right? Then we can either put a comma between the adjective or put the word and in between those sentences. If the word changes completely, then it's not a coordinate adjective. But if the word still stays the same, sentence stays the same, even though the comma or and has been put in there, and then we call that a coordinate adjective. Right. So let's do the last one. It says in the book Catch 22, written by modern American author Joseph Hiller, World War II airmen faced an absurd, frustrating contradiction. Only the insane can opt out of the dangerous flights, yet trying to opt out is viewed as it's viewed as proof of sanity. So yet trying to opt out is viewed as proof of sanity. So we need to now add our one comma to separate the coordinate adjectives. All right, so that is the end of our lesson on coordinate adjectives. We see that adjectives are two adjectives or words that are next to each other. And now it's next to each other and it describes a noun, right? Once a comma is added to that sentence, or let's say in between that two words, right? And the sentence doesn't change, then we can say it's a coordinate adjective. But if we add the word and or comma and the whole sentence changes, then unfortunately, right? So we can even add an the word and then we can check to see if the word or the sentence or the two words, right, that describes a noun, if it is proper a coordinate adjective. All right, so this is the end of our lesson on coordinate adjectives, on commas, sorry, on commas. Thank you very much for joining the class, and I really hope you're going to have a good evening further. Goodbye.